Welcome back, everybody. Eric here with Iraq Veteran 8888. Today, I've got another Gun Gripe episode for you, and today we're going to be talking about Pam Bondi, y'all. Now, look, Trump's DOJ has claimed to be one of the most pro 2A DOJs that we've ever had in probably recent memory, but some of their actions don't exactly line up with what the Trump administration is wanting to accomplish in the way of the Second Amendment, or at least what they say they're wanting to accomplish. We are going to dive into this particular subject. There's been some stuff come out recently from the DOJ that has a lot of people concerned, and I want to kind of approach it from a few different directions, and maybe you'll have a bit of an understanding of what's going on and maybe why it might not be as bad as we think. Let's dive into it. But before we do, I want to thank our friends at My Patriot Supply. Really great group of people, long-term supporter of the channel. Cold weather will be here before you know it. And you know what I realized the other day? If the power goes out when it's really cold, I have no way to keep myself and my family warm. Isn't that crazy? Somebody you could actually freeze to death. But I heard about the Vesta off-grid space heater from our friends at My Patriot Supply. It's a space heater that doesn't use electricity. It runs on something called canned heat, which is an indoor safe fuel. With a Vesta stashed in my closet, I now know that I can keep warm no matter what, and it doubles as a stove to boil water and cook food, which is pretty cool. Now, the best part is you can get a Vesta and a bunch of other cool free gifts when you order the Winter Prep Special from My Patriot Supply. Just go to mypatriotsupply.com/LLP, that's Lima Papa, to see everything that's included. This offer won't last long, and neither will this nice fall weather. So go to mypatriotsupply.com/LLP to order your winter bundle today. And a big thanks to My Patriot Supply for being a long-term supporter of the channel. So there's been a little bit of information come out about this. I know Jared put out a great video that I watched a couple of days ago talking about some of the implications with a recent Supreme Court case that we have. And that Supreme Court case is Rush versus United States. And just to sort of paraphrase what is going on, essentially, this guy got hemmed up with a short-barreled rifle, a 7.5-inch AR with a 30-round magazine in it. And a struggle ensued, and the guy got in an altercation with the police, ended up getting his AR confiscated, and now they are wanting to take this case to the Supreme Court under the grounds that the National Firearms Act is unconstitutional on its face. Well, of course it is. We know that is true. So we would think, all right, well, we want a case like this to go to the Supreme Court because obviously we want to see something like this go our way in the Supreme Court. And here is Pam Bondi's DOJ telling them we absolutely do not want this case to go to the Supreme Court. And they cite multiple references in their statement that they made. Okay. The petitioner cites no case in which a court of appeals has held the NFA to be unconstitutional. All right, to resolve a variety of other analytical issues, such as the meaning of the word arms in the Second Amendment. But in this case, it would be a poor vehicle for addressing those issues. Other types of cases, for instance, cases involving state laws banning AR-15 rifles, would provide better vehicles for clarifying the appropriate framework for discerning what types of arms the Second Amendment protects. It would appear on its face here that the DOJ is basically defending the constitutionality of the NFA. And yes, on the surface, it does have that look to it. And this is not the kind of language that we want to see the DOJ, using, especially when they claim to be, the most pro Second Amendment DOJ we've ever had. I mean, many gun owners brought up a lot of red flags, no pun intended, about Pam Bondi early on. As an AG in Florida, she supported, waiting periods on guns, and she supported, age restrictions, like requiring young adults to be 21 years old before they purchase an AR-15 and things like that. So lots of strange things, red flag confiscations, things like that. So she doesn't really have a record of what we would consider being incredibly pro-gun from day one. So this, of course, adds to the heavy scrutiny that people have with Pam Bondi right now and her DOJ. So, on the surface, yes, this looks like a really terrible thing because we never want the DOJ to come to the Supreme Court and say, well, we don't want you to hear this case because we think, given the circumstances, that that it is constitutional, that the NFA is constitutional. That's a very difficult sort of burden to overcome when you have your very own DOJ telling the Supreme Court essentially, hey, we think the NFA is constitutional on its face, where the argument is that it is not. Do you really want the Supreme Court to come to the table and say, well, we're already kind of in a tight spot with the makeup of judges we have in the Supreme Court is not bad, but they haven't exactly heard a ton of 2A cases, and we have had some decent wins in the courts when it comes to 2A cases from the Supreme Court. So it's like you don't really want to mess up that track record. And, the person, in question here that is involved in this Supreme Court case, is that, I suppose the overall general feeling here is that, is this a bridge you want to die on defending this person? Now, I know that's a cold-hearted thing to say, and before you get your knives and your pitchforks out, from what I understand, this person has a record already, has done some other nefarious things, and has gotten some other trouble. Now, just because you've gotten in some trouble, does that mean that you all of a sudden should have your rights taken from you? No, I don't believe so. Right? I think that this person's rights are just as important as anybody else. Do I believe that the NFA is unconstitutional? I absolutely do. But if we're relying on a relatively tight makeup of judges to make that determination and do it based on the previous behavior of somebody, that they're like, well, we kind of think this person, reeks of criminal activity already. And what kind of message does the Supreme Court want to send when a case gets to the Supreme Court involving someone like this who's already been in trouble before? Are they really going to want to stick their necks out morally and say, yeah, we do think that a lot of areas, if not the entire NFA, is unconstitutional, but do they really want to do it to help somebody like that? I mean, I know that's a cold-hearted thing to say and a cold-hearted way to look at it, but I think the truth is they don't want it to be this type of case that sets the precedence for why short-barreled rifles should be completely removed from the NFA, or, of course, any other things, suppressors and machine guns and things like that. You guys know in January, right, all this stuff is rolling downhill. The tax stamp is going away. So we've already gotten some minor gains. Now, we didn't get everything we wanted with that particular situation, but starting in January, you can now own suppressors and short-barreled rifles without having to pay a $200 tax stamp. So at least the financial burden is removed from people who want to exercise their rights. What the DOJ is saying in this case is that the NFA essentially becomes a licensing and taxation scheme, and that it is not, basically, that short-barreled rifles are not banned in any way, that you can get them. And what they're saying is, it just requires taxation and, of course, registration. Now, many of us, we disagree with the need to, pay a tax or register a firearm to own it. The same DOJ even claims that the burden of proof has not necessarily been demonstrated by this court, that these items are in common enough use to merit, let's just say, a 2A challenge on their constitutionality or not. Of course, we know that's not true. Bruin changes the landscape considerably, right? Because if we look at this under the Bruin landscape, now, yes, regardless of the circumstances under which a person comes to the Supreme Court, maybe they've gotten in trouble before like this person has, or maybe it's not exactly the best example of what we want to show as like our all-star case for getting, short-barreled rifles completely removed from the NFA, or challenging the constitutionality of the NFA from day one, right? That may not be the best case. However, that is not necessarily required for the Bruin standard to apply and for them to go, okay, well, the government must provide extremely compelling proof that the NFA is based on traditional law that has a tradition of being in step with the Second Amendment as it was passed in 1791. I mean, so way back in the day, were people required to register their firearms? No, they were not. Were they required to pay taxes to buy their firearms or ask the government for permission to obtain certain firearms? No, they were not. Citizens could own warships back then. They could own cannons. They could own puckle guns. They could own all these different things. Whatever the military had, a civilian could have, and there wasn't any kind of special permission required. So again, the government, if they're actually doing their due diligence and they're actually doing things in the way that Bruin demands, they're going to have to go all the way back to the drawing board and go, okay, yeah, the NFA is based on a knee jerk reaction to organized crime or whatever the case may be, but is that knee jerk reaction in step with the historical traditions of the Second Amendment as it stands? And I think that answer is unequivocally no. And I think they know that. I think that if they judge on it any other way, if the Supreme Court were to go any other way on it, I think they're only kicking the can down the road, because I think they ultimately know that in the long term prognosis, that the NFA is already existing on borrowed time as it is. I mean, we already have Supreme Court cases that dictate that it is unlawful to charge a tax in the connection of exercising a right, such as polling taxes, like to have to pay to vote. Right? There used to be a polling tax. And they say, well, voting is a right, therefore a tax that stands in the way of that right is an unconstitutional burden upon your ability to exercise that right. Okay, well, what did they do? They said, well, we're going to do away with the $200 tax stamp, and we're still going to require the registration. Again, common use does come into play, because I know in some constitutional language, such as common use, or not constitutional language, but language that the courts are using to determine whether or not a firearm falls under, let's just say, the stipulation of being a controlled item, they keep throwing this common use thing in play, right? So I think that if they're really looking at it pragmatically and accurately and honestly, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, even machine guns, rather, suppressors especially now, are much more in common use than what they were. And these items would be in a heck of a lot more common use if there was not unreasonable burdens placed in the way of the citizen and their ability to exercise their right. That's the argument I would make, is that as many of them as are out there, there would be 2, 3, 5 times as many if there wasn't such a strict burden in place between the person who wants to exercise their right and the right itself. Okay, so is Pam Bondi a poison pill? From day one, I have my doubts about Pam Bondi. I still approach with caution with Trump's DOJ and with Pam Bondi. I mean, I always try to be a little bit more pragmatic and careful about who I place my trust in when it comes to that type of stuff. The only gun control I want is the control of the firearm in my hand, right? I don't want anyone else having any control over the tools that I would use to protect myself, or saying what tools are allowed or not allowed. I think I have plenty of experience about what tools are needed to protect myself. I'm very well versed in what it requires to protect myself, and I will make that decision for myself. And I don't need a nanny state, trying to tell me what I can and can't do. And I think that that's really the environment most Trump supporters, they want to see. A DOJ that allows people to make their decisions on their behalf and to not have to give in any ground to the government to decide what you should or should not own in the way of firearms technology. I mean, especially with all the crazy things that we see going on in our world right now. I mean, there's all sorts of things going on. Look at all the violence happening. There's political violence that's occurring. There's look at Charlie Kirk. I mean, tensions are high amongst many different sides of the political spectrum. Okay, and let's just say maybe you don't even exist in either camp. You're just a person that wants to be left alone. The Second Amendment has never been more important than it is now for average, everyday people to be able to, hey, like, we may not agree with the left or right, or we may not agree with these people or those people, but at the end of the day, we see the crazy things that are going on. I think the majority of people just want to protect themselves, they want to defend themselves, and they definitely, especially if they voted for Trump, they definitely do not want Big Daddy government standing in the way. When things are as crazy as they are right now, we need to have less restrictions. We need to make it easier for people to exercise their right, especially if that right requires a financial burden to overcome to exercise that right. I mean, people are already struggling to put groceries on the table. They're already struggling to make ends meet. Inflation is out of control. They're printing money like crazy, and they're giving it away all over the place. And we are involved in a lot of crazy things right now, and I think that anything that places a stricter financial burden on people should be, especially in relation to the Second Amendment, That should go away. We should do away with any unfair or unconstitutional financial burden or logistical burden or any type of burden that requires us to ask the government for permission. That has to go away. Like, this is 2025. People see the grift. They see what's going on. And I think most people are absolutely tired of being told what to do and being told how they're going to live. And I think there is a huge resurgence within American culture right now where people seem to be really, really fed up with taking orders from people who they don't view as morally good, right? They don't view as morally worthy of making those types of decisions on their behalf. And, people see the government as a lesser of two evils and not as some pariah that's there to help them throughout their everyday life. And I think a lot of people are beginning to look at our organized government very much in that way, and they're really beginning to question just how much power and control in general, not just related to guns, but how much power and control we even want these people to have, period, just due to the awful things that they're constantly engaging in and the people they support and the type of things that they do that don't really appear to benefit the everyday American citizen and that benefit more foreigners and things like that. So there's a lot of that going on, and I think people generally are just fed up with their behavior in general. And I think the Second Amendment is one of those kind of very strict protocols where, maybe it is the fact that Trump, gave his DOJ the task of going and protecting the Second Amendment, right? He signed this executive order requiring Pam Bondi and crew to do what they can to preserve and protect the Second Amendment. I think the appetite that the Republicans have for pro-gun legislation is quite limited, dare I say, maybe not even towards the pro-gun side at all. And it's almost like they just want to stick a pacifier in the mouth of gun owners and give them the bare minimum that they possibly can to get the passing rating as being pro-gun. And that's what this reeks of. It's what this has the feeling of. The DOJ, if they wanted to cause waves, they could have came out and said, look, the Trump administration is dedicated to protecting the Second Amendment rights of its citizens. And okay, maybe this isn't the best Supreme Court case to take to the take to the hill, but if we do, we're going to support this person 110%. And yes, we do believe that the unconstitutionality of the NFA should be brought into question. Absolutely, most certainly. Now, I understand maybe they didn't want to do that within the context of this particular Supreme Court case. That would appear to be what they're kind of going after, right? But I would say that I think the damage control that they're doing right now proves that let's just say your scrutiny of this particular situation, and many of you taking to social media and calling them out, that they absolutely do crush to the scrutiny. They cave to it, and they change their policies or may make internal changes based on that scrutiny. So always call them out when they're doing something good, but also don't be afraid to call them out when they're doing something negative and you go, wait a minute, this really does not look right to us and you guys should change your stance. So, we'll see what happens. I mean, I understand that maybe there's a slight strategy in play here that maybe some people aren't thinking about, or maybe they're too concerned about, the DOJ says the NFA is constitutional, therefore, we're never going to gain any ground on the unconstitutionality of the NFA. And I think that the answer might be more akin to maybe if the right case comes along, we might have a better shot of going to the Supreme Court and getting it thrown out. That's my look at it. I'm not trying to say that Pam Bondi should be trusted or not. This is just one more black stain, PR black stain on Pam Bondi's DOJ. And I think that's the way you should approach it. Pay attention to what they do, not what they say. And I think that's really is what's going to determine how this cookie sort of crumbles here. So thank you so much. Many more videos on the way. I appreciate you watching today's Gun Gripe. I've got a lot of stuff coming up. Some awesome ammo testing I'm going to be filming soon. I've got more body armor testing going on. I have got a bunch of cool new guns in. I've got the new 1854 from Smith & Wesson. I've got a new Beretta 92X in, which is a really sweet pistol. So we've got a bunch of great range videos coming up as well. So thank you so much. Many more videos on the way. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting up the super chat up there and hitting up a donation if you want. Throw a few bucks in the hat. You can totally throw a tip in the pile up there. You can give thanks, the little button up there. If you love the videos and you want to throw a coffee in the hat, that's not something we're certainly going to complain about. Many more videos on the way, and we'll see you soon.